Hello, this is Jeff Shield, Chairman of the Systems Software Workgroup, and I frequently get asked questions about how to build documentation in the OpenPOWER Foundation's documentation development environment. So I thought I'd take a few minutes here to record how-to based upon information that's publicly available to show people how to interact with our open source documentation, how to work within the frameworks that we use to build the common look and feel documentation that we use here in the OpenPOWER Foundation. Let's start by the place where all source code begins, which is, of course, GitHub. The OpenPOWER Foundation is an organization inside of GitHub. It has both public and private repositories. Public ones, of course, one can find examples of those repositories that you may see if you're not a member. Would be the docs template repository, as well as the docs master, which is down here a little bit further. There are also private ones if you become a member and participate in the activities that you can also get access to. But today, the two main repositories we'll be working with will be doc master and docs template. Docs template proper is what we call the documentation development guide for all of our documentation. It is the source code we will be building. It has a very friendly README, license information. All of this stuff that we are using and make available is generally, not all of it, is generally available under the Apache v2 license. So feel free, as we do this demo, to stop, try these things on your own, and work through this while we work on it. So this is the source code for one of the documents we're going to be building today. And the other, of course, well, actually for the document we'll be building today, there is another directory, another project we will need that I'll explain here in a minute. The place we begin when we start looking for documentation in the OpenPOWER Foundation is something we call the resource catalog. To find this resource catalog, you go to the openpowerfoundation.org website, go to the technical pull down, and click on the resource catalog. That brings you to a search engine-like page for finding documentation. As I said, the documentation development, let's go down, let's get it right, development guide. You can certainly type that in, search, and find such a document that shows up in the search results. And we can click on that and begin to find our information. So all documentation, all information in the resource catalog has a landing page that includes details as to where to find the information, how it has been categorized, and a little bit of background about that information. Here, the documentation development guide, when we click on this link, basically then takes us to the browser-based or HTML-based documentation for our project. This is one of two forms that we deliver documentation in the OpenPOWER Foundation. The second one is, of course, via PDF, and you can always get that PDF off of the HTML page here in the header bar for the document. And so we'll mostly be working with PDF today, but there is a section in the latest version of the documentation development guide that describes how to bundle up both the HTML and the PDF for publishing inside of the resource catalog here. So you needn't worry about that really too much today. I want to just make you comfortable with building documents in this PDF form, but I did want to show you what that looks like. And when you click then on this little icon for Adobe Acrobat, you get the documentation very much in a form you would expect, which is the browser version of the OpenPOWER documentation. And so this is probably something you're more common looking at, etc. So this is the end game. And of course, as I said, this all begins in open source code here off of the GitHub repository, and actually in this environment called, or this directory, where all of the files used to build that document are located. So let's begin our project today by setting up our build environment. The documentation development guide has a section on getting started that takes you through how do you install all the tools, Git, Maven, other things that you may need. So you can certainly follow along. I'm going to assume for the sake of this documentation that you've, or this video, that you already have all of those tools, and we're going to work with actually working with the source code. So like all good projects, we need to clone our repository first. Now we certainly clone the documentation or the document that we're working on. I'm going to simply copy that for the sake of simplicity in this exercise. And we can then begin by simply cloning that in our environment and start there. So we clone the document we want to work with. That's a pretty quick process. If we do an ls, we can see that it was created. But if you follow along in the documentation, you find out that you not only need the docs template, you need a base set of information that is common to all documents, and that's known as the docs master project. So we need to create that at the same level as our documentation we're going to be working with, or our documentation project, this docs template. So now if we look in our directory, we have both docs master and doc template. Let me go over here to a little bit of a different representation of what we have going on here. Let's see, let me put away this browser, bring up our files here, and go into then the directory where we have both docs master and doc files, so we can do sort of a visual representation. So if you've ever built in Maven, which this environment is, you become very familiar with everything being built using POM files. POM is sort of the equivalent in a C, C++ environment of a make file. It describes how to do the builds. And if you were to crawl through all the POMs, you would find out that at the high level, the project POM actually for each document points back to the docs master POM, and it needs to know how to find that, relatively speaking. That's why we cloned these two projects side by side. But the actual documentation proper exists in directories inside of whatever a project. So every project can have multiple documents inside of them. The particular documentation development guide that we're going to build today as our example and both look at as a reference is here in the template directory. Again, we see in the template directory there's a POM file. We also see a BK underscore file. That is, if you look in the POM file, you will see that the POM file basically says the entry point for this documentation is the BK main file. I'll go ahead and open that up here at the top and show you some of what this information looks like. Now, the documentation that the OpenPOWER Foundation builds is really a Docbook style documentation, which is an XML derivative or extension. Looks very much like HTML5 type nomenclature, where you have a starting tag and an ending tag, and tags generally describe what they do. Here's a title, begins and ends there. Oh, it's our documentation development guide. There's a subtitle, etc., etc., etc. If we scroll down to the bottom of this, then we begin to see some more meta type tags. This include tag says include the chapter preferences. You'll note that goes up a couple directories into something doc master common. Now we start to see why docs master and doc template need to be laid out in the same places, because there are some things that a natural document will pull in, look and feel. We see that's a preface. We also see an appendix that gets pulled in of common foundation information, and then we have includes of the various chapters or CH underscores, which give us the actual content for our document. So this looks pretty common, pretty straightforward, pretty easy to do and to understand. There certainly is information in the development guide about common things to build, and I'll show you that here a little bit later. The other thing I'll point out is that documentation development guide has a bunch of to-dos in here. This is intended, when you read the documentation development guide later, this guide is also, or can be used as a starting point for new documents. And so therefore you'll find these to-do tags in there. If you're going to use it as a template, basically what you do is you copy the whole project over, or the whole project directory over, and you begin sort of substituting in all of these things that you may want to change in your to-dos. And you'll see that there are comments on how to set values if specific values are set, like this legal notice. You can use the Apache 2 legal notice, or you can use the Foundation external license. You just copy or turn one into a comment, leave the other out there, and select which one you'd like to use. So there are many things like this in the documentation development guide. It's more than just the text you see for the document. So that's sort of at a high level how this works. Let's go ahead then and do our first build. So we have the two directories. If we go into the docs template directory, which is the project we want to build, we can either build at the project level or we can build a particular document. As I said, our document exists in the template directory. So if we go into the template directory, the simplest way to build a project is to simply use the Maven command, and the command to actually build stuff is generate sources. First build, once you kick that off, may take you a while if you've never used Maven before, because Maven is based on Java. There are jar files that run around for each of these types of activities that you're building. And so your first build might be longer than mine and might mention a lot of downloads of jar files. So it could take upwards of 20 minutes sometimes to build your first document, maybe an hour or two, hopefully not that bad. I have had colleagues sometimes complain of it taking overnight. I think they had slow connections. I'd be surprised if it takes more than an hour, but the first build can actually take some time. Once you get to a common build environment, it's rather straightforward to build things like the documentation development guide. Generally builds in about a minute or so. So you get some warnings, you get some informational aspects as it builds, and what it's really working through at this point is building the PDF. And then we're going to get a message saying we're applying custom parameters, and we'll start to see indications that it's actually converting HTML files. We're going to get a whole list of HTML files as they roll by. A couple comments on the build. Besides the fact that it looks like our first build of this document took 1 minute and 9 seconds, not too bad for a 20 to 30 page document. You will notice as I scroll back up here, like I said, it's a little noisy. There's some things that I'd like to try and eliminate. And as I said, it transitions here at the applying customization parameters from building the PDF into the HTML. So if you're not really interested in the HTML and you're doing iterations of your document, you can certainly hit Control-C after you see this message and go look at the documentation in PDF form and not worry about the HTML files. Okay, so let's go back to our folder view of what we have here. And we notice now that we have a new directory in here, this target directory. This is the place where we begin to talk about, all right, so what got built? Where do I find my PDF file? Where do I find things? As is laid out in the documentation development guide, you go into the target directory, you go into the Docbook directory, you go into the web help directory. Those are the three common ones. So target, Docbook, web help. And then there's always one more directory, because this is the level at which we'll bundle everything up. So this directory is here for creating your zip file and your higher level files. Once you go into this final directory, which will vary by project, by document, however you set up your POM files, you will then find your documentation development guide PDF and the HTML index file that starts off all of your sort of browser-based viewing. So if I go open the documentation development guide here, we should see a document that is now dated today, April 11th, 2018, and voila, we've built our first document. So let's have a little fun. how hard is it to perhaps make your first change? Let's do the hello world equivalent on an existing environment and simply change the title in this instance to My Documentation Development Guide. We will make that change, save that off in our book file. We will then go back over and we'll repeat our build. Now this time, let me teach you sort of the next step. Most people that build do actually a two-stage build. They do a Maven clean, which can be a command all by itself, followed by a Maven generate sources, as we said, or you can throw them all together and do a Maven clean generate sources, which I will do here. And let's go ahead and kick off a second build here. See how this goes. Once again, we have the information saying the build is getting started. We should see those same sorts of warnings and the such. And this build will occur. Now, if I click over quickly here to the files, we may actually notice that our target directory disappeared. That was the warning message that sort of appeared. It is now back. You can go back into the Docbook and sort of watch creation of things. The web help directory is there, but the contents of it haven't been created yet. We're still creating the PDF document. We should soon click over and start to see there's the glyph warning. We should finally see it transition with the applying customization parameters and start to build HTML. There we go. If we go look in our directory now, we have the documentation development guide. Oh, by the way, we have the PDF, and we're going to start to see the HTML content appear here as it scrolls by in the background window. So now if we go open our PDF, again, that is from our template directory. That's target, Docbook, web help. In our case, one more directory, which is titled Doc Devel Guide. That last level will change for you. We should this time see a document with the title of My Documentation Development Guide, just as we changed in the source. So that is basically how to build, and your simplest program that one can create here, or your simplest documentation. You can create your first customization of documentation. Now let me take you a step further and show you and answer some of the questions of, but what if I want to build tables, do links? Where do I find this information? Well, it turns out one of my colleagues, Jeff Brown, created this whole chapter called Documentation Examples. And it's nice because although when you read it, it looks a little silly, section title goes here, example of itemized list, blah, 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 it looks a little silly. Remember, you have the source code behind this. So let's go find the source code. Let's go to our files directory. Let's go back to the documentation template directory. Remember, there were two chapters. There was the chapter template overview and the chapter example. Let's open the chapter example file and take a look at how that reads. That has title, and let me just, let's put these two side by side here for a minute so that we can see them. Come on. Put these side by side so that we can look at them. Oh, a little bit more. There we go. There's the one. Let's take this source code, or this as well. Unmaximize. There we go. Let's change the size of this a little bit. Slide this over here, and we start to see how does one create a chapter title. Well, we use the chapter tag, and there's a bunch of things that typically go into a chapter, especially when they sit as a file. So there's an example of chapter. If we go clear to the bottom, you'll see the closing chapter flag. Chapter then has a title that says documentation examples. How do we create a section? There's the top of the section. There's a section inside of it saying itemized list, again with a title, example itemized list. There's our end of the subsection. And we see the tag for paragraph. Here's how we create a paragraph. We use the para and end para, and itemized lists then fully written out. If you want a bulleted list, you use itemized list. You can add a title, which is optional. You don't need that, but then it's list items, each with paras inside of them. And so you can also nest itemized lists and all sorts of goodies. So this chapter becomes an incredibly powerful chapter because it shows you how to embed graphics. One of my favorites, how to do tables, where you can see how to do column headings, how to merge cells across vertically, how to merge them horizontally. Lots of goodies are buried in this chapter examples file. In fact, let's just go down to the example table. We'll search for example table, and we can see this section. So we can, to find something interesting, we go find the section title in the PDF, and then we can look at how to build a table. So there's a table tag, it has a title, it has table groups with column specifications, then there's a table heading with a row, table body with multiple rows. Each row have entries in them. The ways you span rows is you can either, if you're merging vertically, you can use this concept of more rows to basically ensure that a cell spans multiple rows vertically, or if you're going horizontally, you can use the name start and the name end examples. So you'll see visually how all of these get rendered in the chapter examples. So that's a very powerful section. Let's also take a look at one final thing and answer one final question here, which is, how do I typically edit things? There is unfortunately no good answer. Now, it is sort of a religious topic, right? This is the VI versus Emacs sort of discussion. Everybody has their own personal editors that they like best. I will tell you, my Emacs friends tell me there's a wonderful plug-in for the Emacs environment. You can see here that I was using Gedit for editing. It has basic syntax knowledge, meaning it understands XML, but it doesn't understand the actual syntax of it. So it knows what a keyword is. It can give me highlighting of that, but it's not going to check my syntax. There are some other environments that people have recommended. Atom is an awfully configurable environment, so if you use Atom, you can likely get good Docbook help. There even are some editors a little bit more knowledgeable and have templates built into them, like Bluefish. But you can get by with simple VI or your basic editor. But the key part of it is, this is not a WYSIWYG environment. This is not Open LibreOffice. So that's the key aspect, and how much support you get for things is your choice based upon your environment. Okay, so I think we've covered just about everything. Let's go back again, revisit some of the key aspects of what we're doing here. So, code exists in GitHub. The resource catalog brings you to the most important document, the documentation development guide. If one works through that in section 1, you can get started, install tools, clone projects, and then go so far in the most recent version, building your first document. And then chapter 2 becomes incredibly important because it has whole bunches of examples. And the way we build things is we use Maven. We use the Maven commands, clean and generate sources. Oh, and by the way, even in the development guide, you can find information such as debugging build failures. There's some common failures that have been documented there that'll help you. And information on the OpenPOWER documentation process. and places you can find more information on XML, on Docbook, and all sorts of things. So this becomes a very handy guide. Hopefully, you will find this helpful. I'm always available. You can find me through the OpenPOWER Foundation. Feel free to reach out if you've not met me and you find this inside of the foundation. Please feel free to reach out. And as you have suggestions of how to make this guide better, I'd appreciate that as well. And happy docbooking. Good luck in creating your documents. I'm sure we'll be working together. Thank you for your help. Bye-bye.